Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
A few years back, I was working as a cashier at a big supermarket. This story happened on my fourth day working there. I had only been working the register by myself for 2 days at that point. Yeah, they gave me exactly 2 days of training before throwing me to the wolves. If you've never worked retail in my country, let me paint you a picture. Our supermarkets are absolute mayhem on the best of days, but Thursdays and Fridays are something else entirely. See, most stores close 2 hours before sundown on Fridays, which means around 2 in the afternoon during winter and 4:30 in summer. People go absolutely crazy trying to get all their shopping done before then. If you can avoid going to the store on Friday, do yourself a favor and stay home. Thursdays are just as bad, because that's when all the smart people who don't want to deal with Friday rush show up instead. This particular story happened on a Thursday evening when the store was packed wall to wall. We had all 10 checkout lines open and every single one had at least 6 or 7 people waiting. If you got stuck behind a slow cashier, you were basically trapped. Unless you had 10 items or less and could use the express lane. Everything was going smoothly until this one customer rolled up to my register with not one but 2 massive shopping carts completely stuffed with groceries. I'm talking about those huge carts you see at places like Walmart, loaded to the brim with canned goods, pasta, rice, and other non-perishable items. I found out later that he bought supplies for a community center in his neighborhood and did this twice a year to stock their pantry. Really nice guy, very polite. He greeted me with a smile and then told me something that made my heart sink. He said this would be a delivery order. Let me explain why this was such bad news, especially on a night like this. When someone requests delivery, the whole process becomes way more complicated. First, I have to call for help from the store to bag everything, since customers usually do their own bagging. Then all those bags get packed into plastic containers that stack on top of each other and go to the back refrigerator until the delivery truck comes. A regular delivery usually fills 3 to 5 containers, but this looked like it would be double that. I have to input the number of every single container into the computer system, along with the correct delivery address and phone number. Then I print out receipts and put copies in each container. Even for a small delivery, this process takes forever. So there I was, staring at these 2 overflowing carts, knowing this was going to take a while. I turned to the people behind him in line and let them know that this was going to be a delivery order and would take longer than usual. I apologized for any delay and suggested that anyone in a hurry might want to try another line. The entire line let out this collective groan. I didn't blame them one bit. When they looked around at the other lines, they were all just as packed. Nobody moved. I started scanning items as fast as I could, even though it was only my 4th day. I'm pretty good with numbers and had already memorized a lot of the product codes. Things were moving along pretty well at first, but then the bagger couldn't keep up with how fast I was scanning. The area to my left where I put scanned items turned into this massive mountain of cans, bags of chips, boxes of cereal, and everything else you can imagine. I literally couldn't scan another item because stuff was falling back onto my scale, so I stopped and asked the customer if he wanted me to help with bagging. Both he and the store employee helping us were grateful for the assistance. I spent a few minutes bagging groceries just to clear enough space so I could keep scanning. This kept happening every few minutes. The area would get packed again, I'd stop to help bag and clear space, then continue scanning. It was the most efficient way to handle the situation. That's when Karen made her grand entrance. She was maybe in her early 40s with long brown hair. Honestly, she looked pretty normal, except for the way she was standing with one hand on her hip jutting out so far to the side. I wasn't sure how she was keeping her balance. She was about 5 or 6 people back in my line. Karen started yelling at me, asking what I was doing, and demanding to know why I wasn't doing my job. She screamed that I was being lazy and needed to stop and actually work. I didn't think she was talking to me at first, so I kept scanning items. But then she got louder and more aggressive. She screamed even louder, asking what kind of cashier I was and why I wasn't doing my job. She yelled that I should stop being lazy and do my work. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, and everyone in the store could hear her. I tried to apologize and explain that I was just trying to help move things along, but she cut me off before I could finish. She yelled that bagging wasn't my job and that I was a cashier who should stick to being a cashier. Looking back, I realized this would have been the perfect opportunity for some malicious compliance. I could have just sat there and let the items pile up until there was no room to scan anything else. But I was new and didn't want to cause more problems. I explained that I was just helping to move things along faster and suggested that if this was a problem or she was in a hurry, she could move to another line where another cashier would be happy to serve her. I said this as nicely as possible, not sarcastic at all, but it clearly didn't help. She screamed that I should just do my job and repeated over and over that I was a cashier. She asked what was wrong with me and if I was stupid. She yelled that I should be fired. At this point, I stopped responding and focused on scanning and bagging as fast as possible. But then I saw my manager walking over. Let's call him Joe. Joe was actually a great guy who always had his employees' backs. Joe approached Karen and asked what the problem was. Karen screamed that I was awful and lazy and wasn't doing my job. She demanded that Joe fire me and tell me to do my job. She kept repeating that I wasn't doing my job like a broken record. Joe looked over at me, immediately understood what was happening, and turned back to Karen. He told her that she should be able to see I was trying to help and make things go faster. That's when Karen completely lost it. She started screaming words that I couldn't even make out. She was practically foaming at the mouth, spit flying everywhere as she yelled. Joe tried to calm her down by explaining how me helping with bagging was actually making the line move faster, but this just made her even more furious. Her arms were flailing around, and she was screaming like some kind of wild animal. Suddenly, I noticed this elderly woman, probably around 80 years old, trying to get Karen's attention by tapping her on the shoulder. It took several tries, but she finally managed to spin Karen around. The old lady kept trying to get Karen's attention, calling her name and asking her to listen. She had to shout to get through to her. Karen screamed back, asking what the old lady wanted. The elderly woman told Karen that her daughter was crying. The entire store went dead silent. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the world. The crowd of people in front of me shifted slightly, and that's when we all saw her. A little girl who couldn't have been older than 4 years old, clutching her mother's legs and sobbing hysterically. Snot was running down her face and she was hyperventilating from crying so hard. This poor kid was absolutely terrified. Think about it from her perspective. She's in this huge, crowded store where she doesn't know anyone, and her mother is having a complete meltdown for reasons she can't possibly understand. She was practically invisible down there while all this chaos was happening above her head. The silence lasted about 2 seconds before Karen started screaming at Joe again. She blamed him and me for making her daughter cry and made a bunch of other sounds that might have been words but honestly sounded more like an angry animal. What happened next felt like it was in slow motion. Karen started swinging at Joe, aiming right for his face. Joe isn't a huge guy, but he's bigger than Karen and definitely not easily intimidated. This wasn't his first encounter with someone like her. She would have connected with that punch if the elderly woman hadn't grabbed Karen in a bear hug to stop her. Yes, this 80-year-old lady literally tackled Karen to prevent her from hitting my manager. That's when other customers jumped in, trying to separate the old lady from Karen while also preventing Karen from going after Joe. Joe was pretty angry by this point too, so people had to hold him back as well. I saw mall security come running in. Our store was located inside a shopping mall, and suddenly there was this huge crowd of people surrounding Karen. It looked like football players piling on after a fumble. From the sound of the yelling getting farther away, I figured they were dragging Karen either to the back office or to mall security. During this entire crazy scene, I kept scanning and bagging items. I was about halfway through the delivery customer's order when all this started. I finished up his purchase without any more problems. He was incredibly nice and thanked me over and over for helping with the bags, even though it technically wasn't part of my job description. He told me I was the fastest and nicest cashier he'd ever encountered. Nobody else in my line complained about the delay. In fact, several people complimented me on keeping my composure during the whole situation. Apparently, many cashiers in my country think it's okay to yell back at difficult customers, but I'd worked in customer service for years before this job and never once raised my voice at a customer, no matter how much they might have deserved it. Once the evening rush died down, I finally got to take a break. I went to the back room where I found another employee and started telling him what had just happened. He cut me off mid-sentence and started laughing. He told me he had heard all that screaming but had no idea what was going on or that Karen was yelling at me. He then told me that the police had been called and Karen was escorted out of the store and the entire mall in handcuffs. I filled him in on all the details and we spent the next 30 minutes just laughing about the whole thing. I never found out what happened to the little girl. I assume they called a family member to come pick her up since her mom was being arrested. I also never saw Karen again, even though I worked at that store for another full year after this incident. Maybe she learned to do her grocery shopping on quieter days like Tuesday or Wednesday. Or maybe she was in jail or under house arrest. Either way, I wasn't complaining. This was my first encounter with someone like Karen at that job, but it definitely wasn't my last. Working retail really opens your eyes to how entitled and awful some people can be. But it also showed me that there are good people out there too. Like my manager Joe, that sweet delivery customer, and especially that brave elderly lady who stepped in to help when things got out of hand. I've been working retail jobs since I turned 18, mostly to pay my way through community college. After bouncing between a few different places, I ended up at this 24-hour convenience store on the edge of town. The store was one of those places that handled a lot of cash transactions. We had truckers stopping by, late-night workers getting off shift, and people who just preferred cash over cards. Because of this, we had pretty strict policies about handling money. There was a big sign right behind the register that said bills over $20 needed manager approval, though in practice we could accept them after checking with the counterfeit detector pen and doing a visual inspection. The real pain was our cash management system. We had to keep the drawer under a certain limit at all times, which meant making regular drops to the safe. The safe had this automated system that could dispense change, but it had timers and limits built in. Depending on what you needed, it could take up to 30 minutes to get change for a $100 bill. During my overnight shifts, I worked alone and kept my drawer as low as possible to avoid having to deal with the safe system too often. Our register had 5 slots for bills and 5 pockets for coins, but we only kept 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s in the main slots. Anything bigger or checks went underneath until we had enough to make a drop. One of the coin pockets was designated for odd stuff, dollar coins, half dollars, coins people left behind when they told us to keep the change. If someone was a few cents short, we'd dip into that spare change to help them out. About 3 months into working there, I gotten into a good routine. I knew all the regulars, including this one guy who was a bit eccentric. He'd come in maybe once a week and buy random stuff, sometimes energy drinks, sometimes candy, sometimes just weird combinations of things. The strange part was that he always paid with these golden dollar coins called Sacagawea dollars. Most people had never seen them before, and they were bigger than quarters, but smaller than the old silver dollars. The problem was, they didn't fit in our safe's coin tubes, so I had to keep them in the register drawer. That particular night, this regular had come in earlier and bought about $120 worth of stuff, all paid for with those golden dollar coins. I had to spread them out across all the coin pockets and even some of the bill slots to keep the drawer from getting lopsided and sticking. The weight distribution was important because if one side got too heavy, the whole thing would jam. Throughout the night, I've been making a lot of change. The payphones outside needed quarters, the air and water machines broke people's bills, and I had several customers buying small items just to get change for laundry. By around 3 in the morning, my drawer was pretty bare. I had three $1 bills, all those Sacagawea coins, 0 quarters, a handful of dimes and nickels, and a bunch of pennies. That's when he walked in. The guy looked to be in his 40s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and khakis. He had this smug expression even before he said anything. He walked straight to the candy aisle, grabbed a piece of 10-cent bubble gum, and came to the register. He slapped a crisp $100 bill on the counter like he was making some kind of statement. I asked him if he would be getting anything else that night. He told me no with a sharp tone. I asked if he happened to have anything smaller since I was running pretty low on change. Again, he said no, but louder this time. I tried to be helpful and told him not to worry about it. I said the gum could be on the house, and I could use the spare change fund to cover it. That's when he really lost it. He said he wouldn't take charity and that I needed to make change for him. I tried to explain that I didn't have enough cash in my drawer, and it would take about 30 minutes to get change from the safe system. I started to ask if he could wait, but he cut me off. He yelled that I was required by law to take his legal tender and make change for him right now. His voice was getting louder and more obnoxious with each word. I could see he wasn't going to listen to reason, and honestly, I was getting tired of his attitude. I told him okay, and he got this smug look on his face like he'd won some kind of victory. I picked up his $100 bill and pulled out the counterfeit detector pen. Immediately, he started whining and asking what that was for. He told me to just give him his change. I used the pen slowly and deliberately, making sure the security camera could see everything I was doing. Then I held the bill up to the light for visual inspection, also in clear view of the camera. The bill was real, so I put it in the safe tube to drop it, which was policy for large bills during overnight shifts. The customer was still standing there with that smug expression, muttering about how long this was taking. I entered the amount into the register, $100 tendered for a 10-cent purchase. The register calculated the change as $99.90. Now our counter was raised and the drawer sat just below it, so customers couldn't see into it unless they really leaned over and reached. Because of all those heavy coins, the drawer didn't pop open automatically like usual. I had to pull it open manually. The customer was being dramatic, turning around to address an imaginary audience about how long he was waiting, so he didn't notice at first what I was doing. I pushed the three $1 bills back in their slots so he couldn't see them even if he tried to look. I pulled out the 88 cents in change first, mostly nickels since that's what I had the most of. Then I started pulling out the Sacagawea dollar coins and stacking them on the counter. He turned around and saw the growing pile of golden coins. He asked what this nonsense was supposed to be. I explained that I was required by law to accept legal tender and make change, and he was required by law to accept legal tender as change. I told him this was what I had available. He got upset and said I should have told him about this earlier. I reminded him that I had tried to explain the situation, but he had interrupted me and insisted I make change. I went back to counting out the coins, one by one. 99 Sacagawea dollar coins, plus the 88 cents. He went quiet for a few minutes, just watching me stack coin after coin on the counter. The pile was getting pretty impressive. Finally, he asked how he was supposed to get all this home. I told him I wasn't responsible for his change after I gave it to him. He stared at the pile of coins for another minute, probably doing the math in his head, and realizing he'd have to carry almost 100 heavy coins. He looked around like he was hoping for a bag or something, but we charged for bags, and I wasn't about to offer him one for free after the way he'd treated me. Eventually, he grabbed the bottom hem of his shirt and pulled it up about halfway, creating a makeshift pouch. He started scooping the coins into his shirt, and I have to say, watching this grown man waddle out of my store with his shirt full of dollar coins was pretty satisfying. He'd probably have to make multiple trips just to get rid of them all, since those coins would be a pain for him to spend anywhere else. Most places didn't like them, they didn't work in most vending machines, and banks weren't always happy to take large quantities of them. After he left, I cleaned out the counter and went back to my studying. The rest of my shift was peaceful. This happened to my buddy who's one of those guys who doesn't take crap from anyone. He's always been straight talking and direct, which sometimes gets him into situations, but this time It actually worked in his favor. My friend had been having a rough week at his construction job. The project was behind schedule, his crew was dealing with constant delays, and his boss was breathing down everyone's necks. He just wanted to grab some supplies and groceries without any drama. He'd been shopping for about an hour, minding his own business in the hardware section, when he heard that familiar sound behind him, someone clearing their throat in that demanding way. He was wearing a blue flannel shirt and dark jeans, which apparently was enough to confuse this woman into thinking he worked there. Without even turning around, he knew what was coming. My friend loudly and clearly told her that he didn't work there. He grabbed what he needed off the shelf and started walking away. That should have been the end of it, but this lady wasn't having any of that. Karen shouted after him about how rude he was being. She yelled for him to get back there and reminded him that she was a customer. She was practically screaming at this point. My friend stopped dead in his tracks. He'd dealt with demanding customers all week at work, and he wasn't about to take it from some random stranger at the store. He turned around and shouted back just as loudly that he was also a customer. Then he told her to go screw herself and called her an ignorant but ugly old bat. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but you have to understand my friend's personality. He grew up in a rough neighborhood where you either stood your ground or got walked all over. His dad taught him early that respect goes both ways, and if someone disrespects you first, you don't have to take it lying down. Karen just stood there with her mouth hanging open like she couldn't believe someone had the nerve to talk back to her. She was probably used to people just taking her abuse and apologizing. But before either of them could say anything else, 3 men in business suits walked into the aisle from the other end. They'd heard the shouting and came to see what was going on. These guys looked professional, clean-cut, well-dressed, the kind of men you'd see in a corporate office or courtroom. Karen spotted them immediately and her whole demeanor changed. Suddenly, she was the victim. She rushed over to them with crocodile tears streaming down her face. Karen told them she had politely asked this employee for help, but he had insulted her and threatened her instead. She demanded that they fire him right away. The first man tried to explain that he was sorry, but he didn't work there either, so he couldn't fire anyone. But Karen wasn't listening. She was in full entitled mode now. Karen screamed at him not to lie to her. She insisted he was a manager and demanded that he fire my friend immediately. She was yelling so loud that all 3 men actually stepped back. The first officer tried to calm her down. He told her to stop yelling and explained again that he couldn't fire anyone because he didn't work there and wasn't a manager. He never got to finish that sentence though. Karen, in her rage and complete lack of judgment, pulled out a small container of pepper spray and hit him right in the face with it. What happened next was like something out of an action movie. The other 2 men moved faster than I've ever seen anyone move. They were on Karen in seconds, taking her down hard to the floor. She was handcuffed before she even knew what hit her. The second officer announced that they were police and that she was under arrest for assaulting an officer with a weapon. The third officer started reading her rights, telling her she had the right to remain silent. Karen was lying on the floor, and she'd hit it so hard that one of her teeth got knocked out. But even then, she wouldn't shut up. She kept insisting that they weren't real cops and that they were lying. She demanded that they arrest my friend instead, claiming he was the one who had threatened her. She kept shrieking and carrying on while the officers called for a uniformed patrol car. They kept her pinned down until the regular cops arrived. It took 2 uniformed officers to drag her out of the store because she was still fighting and screaming the whole time. My friend walked over to the plainclothes officers to see if they needed anything from him. He asked if they needed him for anything since he had witnessed the whole thing. The first officer, who was already looking better after his partner helped flush out his eyes, told my friend no but asked if he could leave his contact information in case they needed a witness statement later. My friend said absolutely and handed over his details. The officer who got pepper sprayed mentioned that he'd be fine and that these guys deal with much worse on a regular basis. He told my friend that this kind of thing happens more than you'd think. People see them in plain clothes and assume they're store managers or something. But he admitted that pepper spraying someone was definitely a new one. The second officer thanked my friend for offering to help and said they appreciated citizens who were willing to get involved when needed. The whole thing was over in about 20 minutes. But word spread through the store fast. Other customers kept coming up to my friend asking if he was okay and if he really didn't work there. Some people even thanked him for standing up to her and said they were glad someone finally put an entitled customer in their place. A few months later, my friend got a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted to update him on the case since he'd offered to be a witness. The prosecutor explained that Karen had tried to fight the charges at first, claiming she was defending herself from a threatening store employee and 3 men who were impersonating police officers. That didn't work out so well for her when they showed her the security footage and explained that assaulting a police officer is a felony, regardless of whether they're in uniform or not. The pepper spray made it aggravated assault with a weapon, which carried serious penalties. The prosecutor told my friend that Karen's lawyer had strongly advised her to take a plea deal rather than risk going to trial, where she could face even harsher penalties. She eventually agreed, and the judge sentenced her to 1 year and 1 day in prison, 5 years of parole, and 2,500 hours of community service. The prosecutor explained that the extra day over a year meant she'd serve time in state prison instead of county jail, which was apparently a much bigger deal. My friend never had to testify, but he did get a thank you card from the police department for his willingness to help. The card mentioned how important citizen cooperation is in law enforcement and thanked him for his civic-minded attitude. He still shops at that same store, and some of the employees recognize him as the guy from that crazy incident. They often nod and smile when they see him, and a few have mentioned that word got around among the staff about what happened. He jokes that maybe he should wear that blue flannel shirt more often, just to see if anyone else wants to test their luck. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.